Hello and welcome to the Charles River Conservancy. And this is the show about the parklands. And today we are going to talk about public art along the Charles River, and in particular some temporary pieces of public art that are currently on display on Magazine Beach. And before we go there, let me give you a little bit of the context before I introduce my guests. And so, as you know, the Charles River Conservancy works from the Boston Harbor up to the Watertown Dam, all along the shore of the Charles River in Cambridge. And if you've never been a volunteer with the Conservancy, I hope you'll sign up and join us. And if you have never bicycled along the river, this is the best place to bicycle. Take one of those hubway bikes and bicycle along. And I want you to meet our guests now, because we were recently on a jury for a public art show, and it was a lot of fun, and I think you would enjoy to seeing that art. Welcome, Ross Miller.
Thank you. It was fun for me because I was invited as an artist to be on the jury to look at artworks, and that's the best thing to support other people's artwork. So
yes, and this was a interesting project. It's a project that was organized by Common Boston, which is a volunteer group of the Boston Society of Architects, and their goal is to create sustainable, equitable, and creative urban environments. And from time to time they organize competitions. They give people 72 hours to build something. And in that case it was to build something that connects Kendall Square at MIT and Allston, Brighton. And if we go back to the map here, where the river is kind of vertical, on the left-hand side there, that is Allston, Brighton. And then if you cross the river, where there is this right angle, you would come to Magazine Beach. And if you continue on, you come into this Kendall Square area. So Magazine Beach was indeed the site of this competition. But before we go and talk about this competition, you were on the jury because you are a urban public artist. So tell us a little bit about maybe 3 pieces you did in Cambridge that people might know, so they can understand the context of your expertise.
Well, I've thought a lot about the experience of the river. And actually, one piece I haven't told you about, many years ago for a river festival, I commissioned a skywriting plane. It was a temporary project. And the skywriting plane took off and it started flying, tracing the Charles River in the sky about 500 feet above the river. And it came from the boat basin up along through Cambridge, up by Magazine Beach, up through Harvard Square, and then it kept on going. And you could see it go about 15 miles in the distance, tracing over the Charles River up toward.
Did it write something?
It was just making a single line outlining
the
river in the sky.
I love it.
So the project was River in the Sky, and it was a temporary project. But for people who come down to the river, you go, where does that river turn? Where does that river go?
Oh, because it winds in funny ways.
All over the place.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was a way to project the river up into the sky.
Great.
So I forgot about that. Was years ago.
And of course, everybody knows your lights in the winter, the decorative
That's sort of
lights.
the decorative part of my life. If you go through Central Square or Harvard Square, in Central Square there are people dancing over the streets in lights. In Harvard Square there's some stars that are rolling around, and there's actually a one large piece which is a spiral, which is based on M51, which is a spiral nebula about 30 million light years away.
And those lights, you add new ones, but they've been here for a while.
Every year in my studio we repair and replace about 12,000 light bulbs. So you can come and work if you want.
Great. And then there's a light piece I absolutely love under the Zachem Bridge.
The Zachem Bridge, the landscape underneath it was part of what was referred to as the lost half mile. It was this area of industry and freight yards, and in the
garbage dump,
abattoirs. There was a big slaughterhouse. And so people just did not go there. It was smelly. It was kind of a horrible place. And so as part of the central artery, that area was actually brought into the public realm.
This $100 million of mitigation funds.
And a lot of people in the community asking for it over and over again, so it didn't get lost,
Yeah.
that money.
Yeah.
And so the project is 5 beacons, there are 5 stainless steel perforated mesh columns that have lights in them that lead you from that wonderful new bridge that goes over the railroad tracks.
North Bank Bridge.
North Bank Bridge, underneath the Lenny-Zankum Bridge, and then up toward the Charlestown Navy Yard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's of course also where the skate park, where the
There you
groundbreaking
go.
takes place in late October. So
And there are people skating there now, too, on their boards.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
they will have a real skate park. So it's very exciting. There's one very close by to the CCTV studio that you've done on Sydney Street.
There's a park just down Sydney Street from Mass Ave in Cambridgeport, and there was a lot of discussion when that park was happening about how it was in the middle of this kind of biotech MIT zone and how there could be community engagement and stories that might be told there. So I was working with a poet, Monica Raymond, who lives not far from there, and we developed a bunch of pieces, and I did all the sculptural pieces. So there's, when they were doing the construction of the site, they find a bunch of oyster shells that were buried on that site. And so a number of those oyster shells I cast into bronze as little basins.
So people can go and find them.
And
Yeah.
there's a fountain that makes this fog mist, and the mist descends, and it makes a fountain that goes through those little bronze oyster shells.
Great. Well, your pieces are all over, and
They
you
are
have a
little bits.
website, and people you can find
There
it
we go.
on the website. But we want to talk about this competition, and our fellow jurors was Cassie Susie from the Cambridge neighborhood area, Cambridgeport neighborhood area, and works on Magazine Beach, and is the expert on Magazine Beach. And there also was Emily Grandstaff Rice, who is the president of the Boston Society of Architects. She works in Cambridge 7. And then there was Iram Farouk, who is the director of policy, chief of policy and planning, and the deputy director in community development. So there was a wonderful group. We had a great time looking at these pieces of art to, in a way, make it a site-specific piece of art in Magazine Beach. And here,
And the fun thing was we all gathered down there, and we were all going to obviously look at this public art. But the first conversation was all about solar power and about how everybody's working on trying to get to net zero in their houses. So it was actually the whole beginning was fun too.
Yeah. And this particular piece, the arch, was done by a group of mass art students, and remember, they had only 72 hours to decide what they're going to do to build it, and there they were presenting it.
And the fun thing about this piece, you can actually walk through it. You can use it as an alignment device to focus on, in this case, the old magazine, Powder magazine. They reoriented it at one point so you could look down toward the river. But there was also a series of historical photographs placed at the intersections of these pieces of wood. But this is something that's interesting in the world of public art when a number of artists collaborate. And in some ways it's like a little jazz performance. There are several different artists, they all have different ideas, they have a deadline, they're doing almost a performance, and this is the result of that performance. And it was just really impressive to, everybody has busy lives, and here are these students, they actually pulled this together, they figured out a form, they figured out how to build it,
It's
they
very
not very much budget,
yes.
and they figured out how to make something that actually was very evocative.
Yeah, and what was powerful, they moved it around. They had to be 10 feet from the water, that was one of the rules,
Right.
but they moved it close to the water, and so it was almost a gate into the water, because that's where Magazine Beach is, that people used to swim. And
if I wanted to go swim in Magazine Beach, how would I do that?
well, you have to wait a few years and help me raise a few $1 million. But
I thought you were a swimmer.
well, we had some community swims already, and we're going to have more, and there's a swim race. And it will happen. And Dennis Carlone, who's a designer and a city councilor, is thinking about where to swim and how to swim in Magazine Beach. It will happen. It's just it will take a few more years.
And a few people asking for it.
Good, exactly. That's always important. But it was wonderful to work on this project, and DCR, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, who owns the parklands, has been very supportive. So here we have this arch. This project is called Arch. There will be 5 projects, and you can actually vote which projects you like the best. It's one that will be determined by popular vote. So this is Arch, and we're now moving on to the next one. So tell us about the saucer tables.
You know, this was a fun one. This was one architect who proposed this idea, and he had very quickly made these little models of something that was a spike with a flat tabletop, almost like a mushroom, that you could push into the ground, you could set here, as a way to invite people to use it in a different way. And the conversation that this raised was, what is the smallest little device you could put in a place that all of a sudden allows people to say, hey, let's go sit there and put down our coffee and have a conversation.
Yeah. And when he presented it, it wasn't called saucer tables. It was actually Kathy Susie.
This was a great little piece of serendipity. So all of a sudden, Kathy Susie has been very active from the Cambridgeport neighborhood thing. She's been doing a lot of work to raise money and to raise awareness of the potential of Magazine Beach. Said, well, you know, I just found out that in 1947 there were 150 swimmers or something who were in the beach here, and there were and they saw a flying saucer fly over, and they all signed affidavits and said, yes, we really truly saw this, and we weren't all crazy, and we weren't all drinking too much river water, and it was just, and so we got really excited to hear was this person who came up with this idea that looked sort of like a flying saucer, but hadn't known of this history.
Yeah.
So we actually started thinking, well, maybe there could be a device which would be a table, but maybe it has a little bit of lights around it, has a solar panel on the top, it become a whole engaging piece. So that really points to the fact that this was about generating ideas and getting people excited, and again in that sort of jazz way, you know, that you have one person does something and somebody jams on that theme and says, okay, and then so after the fact they were named saucer tables. Yeah,
and what these saucer tables allow is, rather than just having this bench, then suddenly it becomes a gathering place. You can come there with a date and maybe bring a picnic and have something to put your food on and enjoy the view of the river.
Right. So it was a very simple little idea, a very quick execution of an example of that, but it actually had a lot of discussion and potential.
Yeah, and he is a furniture maker, and so he designed these tables and produced these tables himself.
Yep.
And then we discussed whether this could also be, an element could be added of charging your cell phone. There could be some solar panels there for charging.
And then we also discussed how maybe it's good to go to a public place like that and not use your cell phone.
Yes.
And just to engage with nature. So that was, there were several discussions that came out of that, actually.
Yeah. So then we moved to a different part of Magazine Beach, closer to the BU Bridge. And there was a student, a UMass student, who had developed these chalk blocks that they were painted with blackboard color, and you could write on it. And she envisioned that people would write on there, the children could climb onto it and express their views about it.
And it was kind of fun because it's sort of a three-dimensional example of just having a bunch of chalk and be on the asphalt. But maybe it's more geared toward adults because you could write on it on the top just by reaching your hand out to tabletop, or maybe it could be changed and moved around. So again, this was not a project that you could evaluate and say, oh, do I like that or do I not like that? It wasn't really about that. It was really what does this idea make you think about in terms of potential for how artwork could activate that place. Yeah. So to sort of look at this and say, well, that's kind of not, you know, it's not the perfect thing. It wasn't about that. It was really about an idea.
An idea. And I think you brought up that there is actually a wall in Cambridge.
There was a wall
where people write down.
Well, it was a temporary project
again.
It was a
temporary project.
It's based on a woman named Candy Chang who's done this project around the world at this point. Yeah, which is basically it says before I die ... and then people have a line and they say something they want to do, and it's actually a way to solicit all kinds of different ideas. And once one person starts writing on that, then other people say, oh well, it makes me think about this or it makes me think about that. It's actually a nice way of reaching into the public consciousness.
And it was a very brave in a way to the student who did that. She was there by herself. She had done it with others, and she presented it. And there were all these drawers and other people, and she did a great job.
Right.
So it was an interesting thing, and she built those. They built those blocks and painted it, and
it did raise the question of, where would you place things here? Perhaps you could place it over near the footbridge, which leads from the Moore School into the park, or you could place it near the exercise devices. So once you have something like this, then you can think about, what is the best place to activate, but also not to put something. In many ways, when you have a public space, as much as I love to make public art, I'm also interested in not cluttering things up.
Yeah.
You want to be sort of spare about what you do.
Yeah, yeah. So already while we were there on this Sunday afternoon, there were a lot of people who wandered around and looked at the pieces.
Yep.
So let's go to the next one. What I didn't mention earlier is the people who participated in this effort were encouraged to use metal grates. I think it was probably surplus material, and so they were encouraged to use these. Is it refrigerator?
I think they were part of a
platform?
sink drainage pan or something. Yeah.
And so, do you want to explain of how they created that?
I think some of this they actually created right on the site, but their idea was to take a long piece of PVC drainage pipe and put it through the middle of all these, almost like a spine, like a spinal cord.
Mm-hmm.
And then it has a gentle spin to it. So as you look across it, it sort of spirals, almost like a DNA kind of spiral. And the jurors' comments were interesting because it, in some way, looked like something that maybe fell from outer space. Or, when you see people standing around it, you imagine, when people are on the Cape and some odd object washes up on the beach and people are scratching their head.
Almost, yeah.
Something. So it had that kind of enigmatic quality. And it's another piece of what public art can be about. It can be something that arouses curiosity, that brings people together. All of a sudden, we were both looking at the object, but we were all talking amongst ourselves, and other people came by and said, "What is that thing?"
Mm-hmm.
And so in a way, it was a catalyst for a conversation that might not have happened had that artwork not been there.
Yeah.
And that's a value of public art.
And of course, the goal was to find a link between the Allston neighborhood and Kendall Square, and you can almost think as the tube being maybe the future train that will cross or the BU bridge at the railroad bridge. And then those grates that became like a helix of the kind of the Kendall Square.
And it was lined up
science.
almost an axis, so it was sort of slightly an arrow pointing two different directions to these different communities. I don't know if people would understand that who came along, but sometimes those things generate ideas, even if people aren't entirely.
And there are signs up now that explain the art. So this was the fourth of the projects, and then the last one was a project called Come and Play. And let me get the next one, because I learned something as part of that that I had never known before. We are here in Magazine Beach. The bathhouse is to the right. We're looking towards the river, and you see the little red sticks going beyond that, what I call a lobster cage, and they go up a little hill. And I learned that this hill was created as part of the works administration. What is it?
This is a bicentennial project.
Was a bicentennial?
It was a 1976 bicentennial project, and it was actually built as a kind of earthwork form under the idea that this was a fortified site during the Revolutionary War, but it actually had no bearing on actual history or actual archaeology. So it was sort of
an interpretation of what could have been or might have been.
To arouse curiosity.
Yeah.
And so and by the placement of this artwork, and then she put a series of stakes going up that hill, it all of a sudden directed your eye to that. So, sort of like that placing a jar in Tennessee poem, there's this notion that you put some object in a space, and all of a sudden you see not only that object, but the space around it in a new way.
Yeah, and so that was very clever. And she used those metal grates very effectively, and then encouraged people to take those balls and start playing with it, and people did. It's so you could pick up those balls and you could roll them on the grate, so you could try and fit the holes. So it was a very playful thing, and in a way it also complemented what the Conservancy has been doing all summer, is the Sunday Parkland games further up the river, where children and families play on the river. So it was a very different kind of public art.
And even while we were deliberating as a jury discussing these projects, someone went over, reached their hand inside of that case, pulled out a few balls and started juggling.
Yeah.
So there's just this fascinating thing when you start to put things in the public space. It brings different characteristics out of people.
Yeah, yeah. So there were these, I will just go, there's the common play, there's the helix, the chalk blocks, the saucer tables, and the arch. So these are the 5 pieces of art, and you have actually a chance to vote which one you would like to get a prize. The Boston Foundation for Architecture has provided funding for a prize. So the winners of this competition will get
$500 or $300 or $200 or $200,
right.
which
That's
is very
right.
nice.
So you can help the voting, and also I think to engage, it was mostly students who participated in it. To engage them in this urban design effort was a wonderful idea. And Common Boston will also have a walk along the Charles River, which will be led by a staff person of the Charles River Conservancy. So I'm delighted about this effort, because this is all part of building awareness of our enormous resorts. And Cambridge, the city of Cambridge, has been working on making the river more accessible, trying to figure out how can our riverfront be a place where you want to go to. We still have a long way to go, but the conversation has started, and working with the DCR, it's important that the city and the state work together on that, because the land is owned by the state, yet it is the front yard of the city of Cambridge.
Right. And I think it was actually wonderful that DCR was open to this, because these were experimental projects. Nobody knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
So there was an open-endedness that was accepted and experimented with in a temporary way. And I think that it's just there. When I think about public art, here are a couple little pieces. The world could be so much fuller with these things, and to do a temporary project is a really nice way that everybody who saw those things, even though they go back the next time they're not there, maybe they'll miss them, or maybe they won't miss them, or they'll say, well, what else could we have? So it's just kind of an appetizer that hopefully people will be in people's imaginations and encourage future projects.
And as we all know, public art and art in general can change perception, and temporary art can do that. And Charles Eliot, who was very instrumental in creating those parks, or buying the land for the parks, he felt very torn about art. He says, I don't want to clutter things with men on horses or men in uniform, because most public art in his time, in the end of the 19th century, was men on horses. So, as you mentioned, sometimes there can be a cluttering of art, but temporary pieces can change the perception, or if they're placed in the right context or in a subtle way, they really can add a lot to a place like Magazine Beach.
And I think Magazine Beach has been overlooked for so long, that these are different ways of putting a spotlight on it.
Yes.
And, arousing people's interest and encouraging people to go there.
Yeah. So this is how you can vote for one of the 5 projects: the arch, the saucer tables, the chalk block, the helix, or common play. You go to that co-urbanize. It's an interesting new verb of co-urbanizing, and that you can vote for that project. And
so are there some things that you're doing with the Conservancy that are new in the current months or weeks that are coming up?
Well, of course, thank you for asking this. The groundbreaking of the skate park. which has
That's exciting.
which has
How long
been-
have you been waiting for that?
Well, I've been working on the skate park for 15 years, and these things take a long
Good.
time.
Good.
And also recently we heard from Mass DOT that they're going ahead with creating underpasses as you bicycle along the Dr. Paul Dudley White path on the Boston side, so you don't have to fight the traffic at each bridge. They're going to put underpasses there, and they're starting.
May I ask about a time frame for that?
Well, the Anderson Bridge is under construction, and the drawings for the underpasses are happening. They have selected the engineer to draw them, so that's.
So that will happen as part of that renovation?
That will become a change order of that bridge, of the Anderson Bridge. So
That's a good kind of change order, isn't it?
yes, it's a great
Wow.
kind of change order.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and then the other bridge is the Western Avenue and the River Street. They have been pushed back a bit because they're kind of part of the I-90 reconfiguration, but that will happen later. And so the current Mass DOT made the commitment to add underpasses, but we have to fight that the next administration will actually fulfill that pledge. So that's what's happening. So I want to make sure that you can do your voting, and also if you want to learn more about Common Boston, which is a wonderful way of engaging people. And then the Charles River Conservancy has these programs on YouTube, so you can find this program elsewhere. And I want to thank you, Ross Miller, for all the great public art you do for Cambridge. And it was fun doing that jury on Magazine Beach.
That was great fun.
That was great.
And maybe this is just the first of many events on Magazine Beach.
Exactly. So check out the Charles River Conservancy website for past programs and for what's coming up in terms of volunteer events, the groundbreaking of the skate park, next summer swimming. So there should be something for every taste. And thank you very much.
Thank you.